If you were a medieval knight, how would you choose your helmet? Young Sir Knight, I am your loyal friend and advisor, Shinbai. A proper helmet can bring you victory and glory, while a poor one will bring pain to your allies, joy to your enemies, or earn them a hefty ransom. To avoid such a fate, I shall summarize the helmets of the Middle Ages to help you choose. If you find this helpful, please show your approval and grant me 2 coins, bearing a forge and a broken hammer. In the Dark Ages, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, a type of helmet called the Spangenhelm, a segmented helmet, was popular in Western Europe. Spangen refers to the metal strips, and helm means helmet. As its name suggests, this helmet's framework was a conical metal frame, to which 3 to 6 bronze or steel plates were attached. It was likely introduced to Rome by nomadic peoples like the Scythians and Sarmatians. It was later adopted by the kingdoms of early medieval Western Europe. On Trajan's column, dating to around 110 AD, there are depictions of soldiers wearing Sarmatian warriors wearing Spangenhelms. In the 11th century, on the Bayeux tapestry depicting the Norman conquest, this type of helmet also appears. Since this helmet lacked protection for the front and back of the neck, it was sometimes fitted with cheek plates and a neck guard. Additionally, on both sides of the helmet, a flap made of metal or leather was attached to protect the cheeks. Some Spangenhelms featured a nasal guard, while others extended it to protect the eyes. If it lacked a nasal or eye guard, it might have been worn with a face mask. The main reason for the Spangenhelm's popularity was its relatively simple construction and versatility. However, due to its segmented design, its structural integrity was somewhat weaker. Beginning around the 9th century, it was gradually replaced by one-piece helmets forged from a single piece of metal. Furthermore, other types of helmets from the early Middle Ages had a similar construction to the Spangenhelm, such as Nordic helmets of the Vendel period and Anglo-Saxon helmets. In terms of appearance, a typical Spangenhelm had a conical top, while the tops of these other 2 were more rounded. For example, this is the Coppergate helmet, unearthed in York, England, and housed in the York Castle Museum. It was crafted around the 8th century AD, made primarily of iron. Its surface is coated in brass with an 85% copper content. It is an ornate helmet belonging to a nobleman. It is quite possibly the best preserved Anglo-Saxon helmet in existence. The helmet features a nasal guard, as well as cheek guards and a male avane tail. The helmet's main body is made of 8 riveted components, including a frame and infill plates. The male avane tail at the back is attached by forge welding. Another example, the 7th century Pioneer helmet has a similar design. It is an Anglo-Saxon boar-crested helmet. It has a boar crest on top, but is less ornate than the Coppergate helmet, focusing more on practicality. Furthermore, from the 6th to 7th centuries, another type of segmented helmet was popular in Western Europe, the Lamellan helmet, although it also had a nasal guard, cheek guards, and a male avane tail. The main body was constructed of overlapping metal plates. It had a conical crest, sometimes with decorative feathers. This type of helmet was heavily influenced by Eastern styles. It was mainly used by the Avars and the Lombards. Due to the inherent structural weakness of segmented helmets, once one-piece helmets appeared, they were quickly replaced. Before we discuss one-piece helmets made from a single piece of metal, we must first mention the mail coif. Its use spanned a very long period, a design that was likely used throughout the entire era. This was a very widely used piece of armor. It could be used on its own or worn underneath another helmet to provide extra defense for the neck. Generally, it would cover most of the head and extend down to cover the throat, neck, and upper shoulders. It was truly an excellent companion to a helmet. A mail coif was typically made in a 4-in-1 pattern. This means that each individual ring is connected to 4 other rings. The rings were riveted for added strength. It was usually worn over a padded cap, made of leather or textile, not directly on the head. We can see in many historical illustrations that warriors would fight wearing only a mail coif. However, this offers almost no protection against blunt force attacks. Therefore, I would advise you To always wear a rigid helmet over your mail coif, originating in the 9th century, and popular until the 13th century, the nasal helmet is an excellent choice. The most distinct feature of the nasal helmet is, of course, its large nasal guard. It was larger than the nasal guards found on Spangenhelms and similar types. Furthermore, the nasal guard and the helmet's body were forged as a single piece. Thanks to advances in metallurgy, the nasal helmet was usually constructed in one piece, formed from a single sheet of metal, like this 11th century Moravian helmet. However, examples with segmented construction also exist, especially from earlier periods. Early nasal helmets were primarily conical in shape and were often worn with a mail coif. In the Norman conquest depicted on the Bayeux tapestry, William the Conqueror is shown wearing a conical nasal helmet. Starting in the 12th century, its shape began to diversify. Examples include the Phrygian style, with its forward curving peak, the round-topped, and the flat-topped nasal helmet. In the 12th century, the round-top version became popular. On the first Great Seal of Richard the Lionheart from 1189, he is engraved wearing a round-topped nasal helmet. Around the year 1200, a manuscript depicting the murder of Thomas Becket contains illustrations showing both flat-topped and round-topped nasal helmets. Before the 13th century, whether knight or common soldier, many favored the nasal helmet, but as warriors demanded more and more protection for the face, the nasal helmet began to take a back seat. Thus, from the 13th century onward, although knights and men-at-arms generally began to adopt enclosed helmets, many lightly armored troops were still equipped with a nasal helmet and a mail coif. This next helmet is relatively uncommon. It is the kettle hat or war hat. I'm sure upon hearing the name, it's not hard to imagine its shape. It's a metal helmet with a brim. It briefly appeared during the Carolingian dynasty and became popular again in Western Europe from the 12th century. The contemporary Byzantine Empire also adopted this helmet. Early on, it used the segmented construction of the Spangenhelm. Later, it evolved into a one-piece helmet, similar to the nasal helmet. It was generally worn with a mail coif. This helmet has a simple design and was cheaper to produce. Its brim offered better protection from downward strikes and could also defend against falling debris and arrows during siege warfare. And compared to enclosed helmets, it didn't obstruct the wearer's vision or breathing. Generally, this helmet was issued in large numbers to common infantry, but some cavalry or heavy infantry also chose to use it. A version of this helmet was even used by the British during the First and Second World Wars. When you think of a Crusader knight, you often picture the one-piece Great Helm. In the late 12th and early 13th centuries, to better defend against lance charges, the flat-topped nasal helmet was given more facial protection, evolving into the enclosed helmet. This provided the warrior's face with full protection. The faceplate of an enclosed helmet had vision slits and breathing holes. This helmet was worn over a mail coif and padding to absorb the force of impacts. In medieval illustrations, the top of this enclosed helmet was often fitted with decorations to express the warrior's personality. In most cases, this type of helmet was used only by warriors who held the rank of knight. Around the year 1240, the enclosed helmet evolved into the Great Helm. The earlier, flat-topped enclosed helmet is also known as the Proto-Great Helm. The Great Helm was shaped like a flat-topped steel cylinder. It was very large, completely covering the entire head and neck, with only narrow slits on the front for vision and breathing. Early Great Helms had sharp, angular edges, which later became more curved. The top also changed from flat to conical to better deflect blows. Inside the Great Helm, a padded lining and a mail coif were worn, sometimes a smaller skullcap. The servalier was also worn inside. As a symbol of a knight's status, the Great Helm was often customized with various decorations, such as being blackened, or by adding crests like antlers, or crowns to the top. Decorative perforations on the front were also ranged in cross-shaped or horizontal patterns. The Great Helm's protection was outstanding for its time, and it was relatively simple to make. However, its vision and ventilation were poor, especially when used in hot weather. It placed a great burden on the warrior. Furthermore, its flat surfaces were prone to denting. Knights would often remove their great helm after the initial charge to have better vision in close quarters combat. Around the year 1400, a variant of the great helm appeared. Because it resembles a frog's head, it's also called the frog-mouth helm. The streamlined shape of the frog-mouth helm was better at deflecting the impact from a lance. Additionally, its eye slit was designed so a knight could tilt their head up just before impact, raising their line of sight, which completely eliminated any openings. This also prevented lance splinters from entering the helmet. However, this helmet was usually bolted or riveted directly to the breastplate. The wearer could only look forward and couldn't turn their head. Therefore, it was mainly used for jousting tournaments, and was almost never used on the battlefield. In later periods, a hinged version that could be opened also appeared. Around the 12th century, a very simple, round helmet appeared, called the cervelier. It looks like a small skullcap. It could be worn by itself, or underneath a larger helmet, like the Great Helm. Of course, it could also be worn with a mail coif. However, it could be worn either over the mail coif or underneath it. This helmet was even simpler to make and cheaper. Aside from being used as a secondary helmet, it was often worn by civilians, merchants, and other non-combatants. The use of this helmet continued well into the Renaissance period. During that time, its shape changed somewhat. The top became more pointed, but the overall form remained rounded. When the top of this helmet became sufficiently pointed, and its lower edge began to cover the neck, a new type of helmet was born, the Bascinet, or middle helmet. According to records, this helmet first appeared in 1281 in Padua, Italy. At the time, it was equipped by infantry. A mail tail could be attached to the front of this helmet to protect the shoulders and neck. It wasn't designed to be worn over a mail coif. Early aventails were riveted directly to the helmet's edge. Around the year 1320, a detachable version, fastened with a leather strap, appeared. With the addition of a removable nasal guard, it became an exceptionally versatile helmet. Around the year 1330, to further enhance facial protection, craftsmen began fitting the Bascinet with a hinged visor. The visor had eye slits and breathing holes. When closed, it could be secured with a pin. The earliest visors pivoted from a single point on the brow. However, this design could easily be knocked out of alignment. So, around 1340, a dual pivot visor appeared. In the first half of the 14th century, visors generally had a flat profile. Around 1380, the visor became much larger and extended forward into a conical snout, known as the hound skull. It was also called the pig-faced visor. This design could both deflect weapon attacks and allow for more breathing holes, improving ventilation. Later, a rigid plate gorget for the neck was also introduced, replacing the mail tail. This turned the Bascinet into an extremely effective system of head protection. This complete system was known as the Great Bascinet. One of its components, the bever, was a plate component that covered the cheeks and chin. It was riveted to the helmet, allowing it to rotate slightly with the helmet, while the outer plate gorget remained stationary. Around the 15th century, the visor of the Bascinet became progressively more rounded and was covered with breathing holes. The Bascinet continued to be used until the end of the Middle Ages. Afterward, lighter and more reliable helmet systems emerged and took its place. By the 15th century, at the end of the Middle Ages, several more complex and advanced helmet designs appeared. First among them is the Sallet. It first appeared in Italy and quickly became popular in England, France, the Low Countries, and Germany. In fact, it can be considered a variant of the Bascinet. Initially, to be more lightweight, it discarded facial protection. The helmet curved backwards and extended downwards to protect the cheeks and the back of the neck. After the 15th century, production of the Sallet was mainly concentrated in Milan, Italy, and in the German cities of Augsburg and Nuremberg. The Italian style was more rounded and streamlined. It was generally used without a visor, offering better vision. It was suited for light troops and ranged units. If it was to be worn by heavy troops, It could also be fitted with a full, hinged visor on the front, with a mail gorget to protect the neck. The German-style Sallet had a rounded main body, but its curves were not as smooth as the Italian style. Its most recognizable feature was its long tail, which grew in length over time, sometimes like a lobster's tail. It was made from several overlapping plates. It had a very distinctive appearance. The front of the German Sallet had a visor that covered the upper half of the face. Sometimes it was fixed to the main body, and other times it was hinged so it could be opened. The lower half of the face was protected by a plate gorget, or bever. It was primarily used by heavy troops. In the mid-15th century, an English, Burgundian, and French style of Sallet also appeared. Their overall shape was a cross between the Italian and German styles. The tail was slightly shorter than the German type, and it's also known as the short-tailed Sallet. In the same period, a helmet inspired by the ancient Greek, Corinthian helmet, the barbute, also appeared in Italy. Some also consider it a unique variant of the Sallet. This helmet is forged from a single piece. Its key feature is that the sides of the helmet extend forward to frame the face, creating a T-shaped or Y-shaped facial opening. The edges of the T-shaped opening usually have reinforcing strips fastened with rivets. The Y-shape features a nasal guard. This helmet was also worn with a mail or plate gorget for added protection. In the late 15th century, some barbutes with even larger facial openings also appeared. The Armet, which appeared in 15th century Milan, had a sophisticated and integrated design. It was the first helmet to completely enclose the head, while still allowing the wearer to turn their head freely inside. It balanced mobility, flexibility, and protection. The overall shape of the Armet closely followed the contours of the head. Therefore, it required a mechanical structure to open and close, rather than simply being pulled on. This helmet generally consists of four parts: the main skull piece, two hinged cheek plates, and a dual pivot visor. A mail gorget was also sometimes attached to the bottom. To put on the Armet, the wearer would swing the two cheek plates open, place it on their head, then close and lock them at the chin. It was then secured by a rotating disc at the back of the neck, with a hook and a perforated stud. The rondel at the back of the neck is arguably this helmet's most distinctive feature. For the armor design of its time, this helmet was a groundbreaking invention. It was unlike any previous helmet design. Its complex yet logical design showed early signs of ergonomic principles. From the late Middle Ages to the Renaissance, it was widely used across Western Europe. It's also the quintessential helmet seen on knights in full plate armor in many works of art and fiction. I highly recommend you use this exceptional helmet. Finally, let's look at the close helm, which appeared from the late Middle Ages to the Renaissance. In appearance, it is quite similar to the Armet. The main body is rounded, and its shape also follows the contours of the head, but its construction and locking method are distinctly different. It opens on a single pivot, separating into a front and back half. This is unlike the Armet, which has a pivot on each side and opens from the sides. When closed, it is fastened at the sides, not at the back of the neck, using straps and studs. The visor of this helmet, depending on the region and the user's preferences, often took on different forms. The sparrow's beak style of visor was quite common, while the close helm of a suit of Maximilian armor had a bellows-style visor. There were also some grotesque-style visors, crafted into all sorts of strange and unusual shapes. All right, that concludes our general introduction to medieval helmets. If I have missed any lesser-known types, please be sure to add them in the comments. If I have the opportunity, I will introduce you to the armor styles of the post-medieval period. Finally, I want to emphasize, when using a helmet, always be mindful of protecting your neck. If you should encounter a knight on the battlefield wearing an ornate helmet, but whose neck is completely exposed, make him your immediate target. May you be ever victorious on the field of battle. Until next time.